until Reena's finished talking, or you can use the chat box. And then what we'll do is at the end, if I don't answer it straight away, we'll run through the chat box when Reena's finished talking, and we'll try and cover everything that's in there. So there will be plenty of time for discussion at the end of Reena's presentation. So yeah, that's enough from me really, just other than to say just enjoy. And I'd like to introduce Reina. Reina Vandervalt is a senior speech and language therapist, and she's working at Cerebral Palsy Cymru in Wales. Reina, off you go.
Thank you very much, Dawn. And hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share, I wouldn't say maybe top tips, but definitely tips on telehealth, and specifically in terms of the way we work at Cerebral Palsy Cymru in Cardiff, Wales. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, good.
So telehealth, telepractice, telemedicine, teletherapy are all terms that are defined by the World Health Organization as a delivery of healthcare services where the patients and the providers are separated by Sorry, I was turned off. Can you hear me now? Sorry, things went wrong. I'll just have to share again. Okay, we're back on. So this is the definition by the World Health Organization, and we're very familiar with that, I'm sure. So for us in the United Kingdom, to ensure the continuity of support for service users during COVID-19, our Health Professions Council, the professional organizations, and also all the local health boards throughout the United Kingdom made guidance available specifically for the remote provision of healthcare services using technology. And I'm sure this is true for most, if not all, countries worldwide. And this has been very helpful, at least to get started when we were thrown in the deep end and we didn't really know how to do this because we haven't done this before. However, at this stage, a couple of months into providing telehealth, we have gained personal experience, and obviously that is invaluable and very useful that we can share this at this time. So some of the guidance provided by the authorities were to maintain standards of service, to promote and safeguard the interests of service users, and to manage risks to service users as well as ourselves, the service providers, to maintain confidentiality, to communicate appropriately, and to carefully delegate responsibility of the things we would have done to the service users and others. And of course, to maintain professional autonomy and accountability. My aim with this session is to share some of what we have learned at Cerebral Palsy Cymru so far on delivering telehealth sessions. And we have been trying to resemble a face-to-face session as closely as possible, and this has been quite a challenge. And I want to emphasize that this is from the perspective of a multidisciplinary therapy team, and the principles obviously can be applied as required by yourselves in your professions. Some of the important considerations that we realized from the beginning was that we need to consider the family's rights and responsibilities, including their right to decline this mode of service delivery. And there have definitely been parents who have declined, even though they had the need for input from therapists, and it had nothing at the time, especially at the beginning of lockdown. There were still some of those who said we would rather wait for an opportunity to have a later face-to-face session than do an online session. And even though there's growing evidence in support of telehealth, there's also agreement that it's definitely not ideal or even suitable for everyone. So we have to recognize the need to have alternative safe service options should the service user decline or doesn't have access to technology, or it is evident to us and them that telehealth will not work for a specific client. There are some definite advantages, as I'm sure we'll all agree. And one of the main advantages is that no travel is required for families, but in most cases also for us, the service providers. And we know that how travel, when families travel long distance through heavy traffic, that can impact on a child's behavior and performance within therapy sessions. So this is a great advantage. The child is in a familiar environment, and therefore there's nothing scary about being in a different environment or with strange adults. And for us as professionals, we have more realistic expectations, and the suggestions are based on what is available in the family environment. In our particular service, we don't have the privilege of doing home visits, so we actually never see the families' homes, and they come to our service and we have our therapy equipment, our clinical setting. So although we try to sometimes change things so that we have a sofa or a couch in the therapy room to make it look a little bit more like a home, it's still a great advantage to see the family home, to know what they have available so that we can make realistic suggestions. The family is doing all the handling, and they're using their own furniture and their own equipment in the home. And so there's immediate carryover and relevance of the suggestions that we make to them. The other advantage is that others in the home are hearing and seeing all that is suggested and done firsthand. And this is sometimes difficult for parents, or maybe one parent who comes to a therapy session with a child, to convey information that we have shared with them, with the family, the extended family. And there's always the possibility of misinterpretation and misunderstandings if this information is transferred secondhand. Teamwork is easier because members around a child's care can join the sessions as they are able to fit it in, because they don't have to travel or take time off their own work schedules. And so the service to a child and their family is less disjointed. But there are very definite challenges for families, as we've already heard in some of the presentations this morning. Families are obliged to let us into their homes. And I'm sure we can all identify that may not be ideal to have someone in your home, especially during a lockdown situation where people are self-isolating or shielding, and large families are at home, and it's a busy environment. It may be noisy, and it may be difficult for families to take that time out and have it quiet enough and for us to give them the input. So the burden is on the parents to carry out everything without the hands-on support from clinicians within a therapy session or therapy environment. And it can be stressful for parents to have several people on screen watching them do the work. And in our service, there very often are more than just one therapist attending the session, and there may be extended family and others attending the session. So the screen, it might be quite daunting for the parents as they are being watched. So the parent or the carer is required to play a much more significant role in a child's therapy, and this can be daunting for them. And so it's important for us to convey trust in the parent's ability to do the unfamiliar, unusual things throughout a session and throughout the care via telehealth. And as we probably have all experienced, there are very definite challenges for us as service providers, as professionals. And in our own service, the telehealth or video consultations have so far been done by more experienced staff. And this could pose a challenge for services, especially services who have newly qualified therapists or therapists who are experienced but not specifically in neurodisability. And we know that we depend on our experience and our knowledge to judge what we are seeing and hearing in the absence of being able to feel what is occurring firsthand or to manipulate the environment. We also feel that we need experience with a variety of clinical presentations, especially with children with cerebral palsy. That makes it easier for us to predict or to anticipate in order to guide a parent who's physically present with the child or with the adult with a disability. We depend to a large extent on what we feel with our hands as therapists when we work with a child or adult with a neurodisability. For example, the quality of muscle tone, joint range of motion, resistance or not to movement, and so on. And our practice environments are set up to elicit behaviors we want to assess or to observe to guide our intervention so that we can advise families. We've also come to realize one needs excellent communication skills when directing someone else to be your hands. You have to say just enough, not too much. You have to be encouraging, you have to be flexible, you have to be patient. And this takes experience and this takes practice. And some online or remote service provision is extremely high risk, yet are often the urgent and important services that we need to provide. And for myself as a speech and language therapist, I find an eating and drinking assessment and intervention extremely high risk because of the possibility of choking aspiration when we suggest certain things to a parent, and we're not in the situation to help when something happens to a child who's aspirating. And some assessments and intervention may not be impossible, but they are very difficult to perform remotely. For example, positioning in specialist equipment, setting up AAC devices and software. We've had a situation where I had to do an eating and drinking assessment and intervention with a child, and he had received the specialist equipment. It was delivered to his house, new equipment. It was during the strict lockdown where no one could go to their home to help them with positioning. This was the first time they'd received a specialist piece of equipment. And it was very clear during the telehealth session that the parents really struggled to know how to get this child with dystonic athetosis into the chair. So something like that can be really difficult or even impossible when you do it remotely. So some of the things we do prior to a telehealth session is to gain consent, obviously, and specifically for telehealth. Although we always have consent forms available for parents when they come to our center, we had to adapt this for the telehealth situation. In our own service, we do home programs for parents after a block of therapy. And we take photographs in the sessions, which help us then to put this into a home program. And during the telehealth, we take screenshots and sometimes we make a video recording. So we have to have the permission of parents to do that and manage that very carefully. And informed consent may be given verbally or in written form. Through electronic signatures, and this is obviously unique to telehealth. And we have to remember to document verbal consent in clinical notes. We also have to be very sure that we have online security, and this is where the help of technicians can help, is very valuable for us. Prior to the telehealth session, we also have to ensure privacy at our own and the client's location. And we have found that it's sometimes useful to have a telephone conversation or even a video consultation with the parent, the family first, before we see the child, to help them set up their own environment as we set up our own as well. we ask the families to inform us who else may be attending the virtual visit, because the camera may be focused on the child and one parent, but you're not able to see the rest of the room where the child is, and this can sometimes be distracting to the child, and we need to know that. We also need to control the access to the session, and this is made possible through passwords and virtual waiting rooms in the various platforms. And we found this very valuable, although I also have an incident where, so we asked the parents beforehand whether we now ask them whether they're inviting anyone else to attend, because we sent them a link and they may pass this link on to extended family, to grandparents. And this happened to us once, we didn't know. And I saw a strange name that I didn't recognize in the waiting room and bumped them off. I didn't allow them in. And a few minutes later, I received a text message from a parent to say, "You just bumped off the grandparents. They wanted to attend the session." So, and now we do ask them to tell us if they're inviting anyone else. It's also useful to to disable functions that allow others to record the session, because people who are technically savvy may be able to do that. And I also now disable the chat function, because it can be very disturbing if someone keeps sending messages, if there are a few people on the call. And sometimes it's not appropriate for the family to see the messages, or it just is interfering with the session. So we ask people who are on the calls, especially if they're other colleagues, if they feel they need to tell us something really urgently or make us aware of something, to send us a text message rather than use the chat function. It's sometimes necessary to send information regarding the video consultation ahead of time if we haven't conveyed that over the telephone. So this is an example of guidelines that we might send to families. We ask them to download the platform if that's required on their device, and they might need help doing that. We ask that at least 2 adults are present in the session, because one has to be with the child and the other needs to control the camera. And sometimes this isn't possible, because especially as people have been going back to work, there may only be one parent at home with the child. And we've had sessions where a parent had the phone in the one hand and helping the child with the other, and so we couldn't really see what was happening. And so they need a hands-free unit, which they don't always have, but I'll show you later some really handy do-it-yourself stands for iPads and phones if parents don't have it commercially available. So we advise them on clothing for the child. We ask them to have a clear space on the floor, or to have the positioning equipment ready in the room, so they don't have to go and find it somewhere upstairs or hidden away somewhere in the house. To have some of their child's favorite toys or activities available. And although we welcome siblings and they're sometimes very useful within a session, it can also be quite difficult if they are disruptive. So we ask that they are somewhere occupied somewhere else in the house. It's not always easy to keep background noise to the minimum in a busy household, but we at least try to, and it might be useful for parents to close a door to other noisy spaces in the house. And we ask them to tell us if they are sending the link to other family members. Obviously, in preparing for telehealth, we choose the best platform, and there are various platforms available now. Obviously, you need a webcam, a microphone, and speakers, and stable internet connection. And this has been a problem for us, as I'm sure you've also experienced, where and we've discovered that sometimes 4G is more stable than a Wi-Fi connection. So this is just something that you learn over time. And we have to ensure that personal identifiable data is secure. So we have to set up our own technology, and very importantly, the workspace. So we ask parents to have floor space ready, and most of the children, and especially young children, are on the floor when we do the assessment and work with them. And so we have decided, I think it just happened automatically, that we all position ourselves on the floor as well. So you have to prepare a space that is uncluttered, and yet have your tools and material that you might use for the session around you, so that you don't have to get up from the video session to go and find them. And sometimes we have to phone the parents beforehand to help them set up their physical environment and guide them in terms, they have to show us the place where they are, so that we can suggest what would be the best corner to work in. And we want them to have certain items maybe beforehand that we might have to send home or send digitally. And also I ask that they turn off notifications. There's nothing more annoying than when you constantly hear the ping of emails and Facebook and Instagram notifications coming through during the session. So examples of the things that we want to have ready on screen, because on the platforms you can share your screen as I'm doing now. And sometimes there are things that you know beforehand because you've already done the assessment, and you have several intervention sessions. So you know what you might need, and to have that ready in the background is really useful. Things like eye pointing assessment for AAC, maybe a sensory profile. Perhaps you want to do a care and comfort questionnaire that parents can fill out, or a pain scale if you want to assess the level of a child's pain or discomfort. You may have to send out or post out to a parent things like drinking utensils, eating and drinking utensils, thickener for liquids. So these are just examples, and you obviously can fill in your own examples that you may think of. Then there are very useful tools. The one on the left is a visualizer, which turns non-digital material into a digital display, like a book or pictures or even objects. So this may be very useful. I don't have one of these. We don't have one in our center, and that's definitely high on my wish list, because I think this may be really useful. Because especially in speech and language therapy, and maybe in your professions, when we want to do an assessment or we want to show pictures when we do an AAC intervention or assessment, obviously you can have it beforehand, prepare and take photographs and show that as you share your screen. But this is so much quicker, and you can show what you're doing with your hands, etc. As an alternative, I do use my phone on a tripod, because you can then manipulate the phone to show what you're doing, to show parents. These are some of the examples of do-it-yourself iPad and iPhone stands that are available on YouTube. My favorite is my own egg box iPad stand, which I use all the time and have on my desk, because it's so much more stable and reliable than the commercially available one that I have. And it's so easy to do. You literally just take the, because it has the inside supports, so easy to use. This is an example of what you might share on the whiteboard, and many of the platforms have a whiteboard available. So in one of the sessions, the occupational therapist was trying to get the child to copy writing and shapes and letters and so on. And it was a 6-year-old child, and he was intrigued by this whiteboard, and that the therapist was doing these, was writing, and then as if she was in the room. And this was really lovely for him to be able to interact in that way. So the whiteboard facility is really great and very worthwhile experimenting with as a tool that you could use in a session. In our own service, we usually have 2 therapists in a session, in the same way that we work face-to-face. So it would be 2 usually two different professions, a physio with a speech and language therapist, occupational therapist and physio. And so one person would lead. And when there are several people on the call, we find that it's better if they mute themselves when they're not talking, and sometimes to have video off until they are required to talk to the parent or child, because children get very distracted with people on the screen, and sometimes you know, that interferes with our interaction with them, or what the parent can do with them, because they're so distracted by people, other people. As far as possible, we feel it's important to talk directly to the child and not always through the parent. And this will obviously depend on a child's age, their level of understanding and cognition, their attention, the severity of their difficulty, etc. Although I've been pleasantly surprised, and I'm sure many of you have been, how easy or how familiar children are with the screens now, because they're so used to, during the lockdown, interacting with family members and others on screen through Zoom and Skype and so on. So that mostly children are very keen to interact with us and to respond to us on screen. So it is really useful to interact with them directly. Also helps sometimes to support the parent by talking to the child or showing something online while the parent is trying to facilitate a movement pattern or doing positioning or something that you're asking them to do. And to guide them on the types of toys and the way to play to support a child's behavior and action, something that we might do automatically within a session if we're face to face. And we find that it's very important to continuously, as a parent is being our hands, to give constructive feedback to make it easier for them. So this is an example of how we might support a parent while facilitating a child in a certain position. If she's a bit reluctant to do that, we might play, tell a story, sing a song, or count while the parent is doing that. And we find that children do things, and parents would say, "Well, never been able to keep her in lying on her tummy before." But when looking at the screen and with our entertainment, this was supporting the parent in doing this. We need to consider also what the parents can see on the other side. And we need to ascertain this beforehand. And we recommend that they use an iPad or a laptop if they have that available instead of a phone. And it's amazing. We realized eventually, after a couple of sessions, that parents tend to use their phones, even though they might have an iPad or a laptop hidden away somewhere. And so, but a phone, the screen is very small, and sometimes we demonstrate things and it's very difficult to see on a small screen. So during the session, we have our equipment and tools available to demonstrate. And we were very fortunate in that before the lockdown, before we even knew that COVID existed, our therapy manager gave each of the therapists a doll, a floppy doll, as a Christmas present. And so we had these dolls, which come in so handy now that we have to do telehealth, because you can demonstrate positioning of toys and you know how to position children on the floor. And I have to look twice at this picture, which is really a doll going upstairs, but you can demonstrate how to facilitate children going upstairs, sitting on a potty, and how to provide the supports. Some of my favorite sessions and that I absolutely love are my speech and language therapy sessions, where the child is positioned, preferably in their supportive equipment, ready for me at the screen. And I find it useful now to have a conversation with the parents beforehand to say, what are the favorite toys and activities? let's have that ready. So, and I'll try to have similar things available. And this is fascinating for this little girl. It was absolutely fascinating that I had the same toys as her when we played dolls, and showed Mom how to give her a choice, and then how to play, and what words to use, what language to use. For this particular child, because I knew we were going to play with dolls, I had symbols ready and shared my screen to progress her communication from choosing between objects to choosing pictures. So I shared the screen, and Mom would tell me which item she chose, either by pointing with her finger or pointing with her eyes. And then I would come back onto the video to continue playing with her. And so an AAC language and speech session was quite easy to do with children. So we would sometimes demonstrate with the dolls what we want parents to do, how we want them to arrange furniture and to accomplish certain things. And so the parent is doing that at home simultaneously. And as we would in a session, we celebrate their achievements, and the children just love this when they realize somebody is watching them, and they often want to show off. And parents would comment that they wouldn't do that for us, but because you're on the screen and cheering them on, they are doing it. So this is an example of other activities that we would show online, but then also all of these would also be in their home program so that they can carry on with the activities that we all agreed on. This is an example of a parent facilitating transitions from the floor into standing, which is something she really struggled with. And it is wonderful then for this child to be in her own bedroom, standing at her own toy furniture, and there's immediate carryover. So although telehealth has limitations, it allows continuing service provision when face-to-face is restricted, or in some cases impossible. And we may have to accept that telehealth will be an essential part of how we work for the foreseeable future. And the term "we're in this together" has become very popular, but it is really true. Around the world, we're in this together. And this is so valuable in sharing ideas with each other. So my motto every morning is be calm, be natural, be flexible, and above all, have a sense of humor, because things seldom go according to plan, and you just have to learn to adjust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Reena. Are you able to, that's it, yeah, great.
I'm back.
Yeah. Right, lovely. Thank you very, very much. That was really full of lots of useful information for sharing with everybody. I just wonder if anybody has any questions or comments. There's Alicia did put in the chat there that she's going to put a little plug in there for the conference Better Together in Melbourne. So everybody gets the chance to see that.
Good.
Are there any questions or comments? Would anybody like to say anything? Was it useful? Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Vardit.
Can they unmute themselves?
Yeah, if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself, of course. Yeah.
Reena, I wondered if you wanted to say anything about engagement. I think that's a really important but quite challenging thing with the screen. You know, what sort of ages of children have been easier to engage, and what are the particular difficulties? I'm just thinking of the more mobile children. I find the biggest challenge, that often want to pick up your screen and walk off with it, or
Yes, I agree. The more mobile, the more passive they are, the easier, sadly. The more mobile children, busy children, hyperactive children are the more difficult ones. It's also difficult for the person who is managing the device to follow the child running around in the house. And so sometimes we have to help the parents, guide them to arrange their furniture in such a way that the child is within a confined space and cannot escape. That doesn't always work because they might protest, and then that behavior is difficult to manage. But yeah, those are the children that are difficult to help or to do online or to engage. And then there are children, obviously, who are very severely cognitively impaired, so they are difficult to engage. But I have to say, I have been pleasantly surprised, and the more experienced we are, the more we know how to interact with them on screen, and you become more creative. I have been pleasantly surprised in children that I thought were too young that actually interacted with us. The other day we had 15-month-old twins who have a syndrome. They're not cerebral palsy, but they definitely have cognitive impairment. But my colleague she had them face-to-face in the therapy session, and she was engaging with the parent, and the two of them were lying on their tummies facing the screen, and I was on the screen. I was on Zoom, but I was engaging with them, and I just had objects that I was just showing, come in with the object and then the next one, and these two were absolutely glued to the screen. And the parent, I heard the mum commenting in the background saying, "That's amazing. They're actually staying on their tummies and they're not crying, they're not fussing." So sometimes it's surprising who you can engage. It'd be interesting to hear other people's experiences.
Yes. Are other people feeling, finding the same challenges or the same advantages? Go on, Anna, are you going to say something?
I was going to ask a question, Reena. Thank you for a great presentation. I missed the beginning bit, but the actual practical demonstrations looked fantastic. I was going to ask a slightly different thing. One of the problems that I have across is the technologically challenged families, but also where there is poverty. Sorry, there's some disturbance.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody's muted.
Please,
Can you mute if you're not specifically talking? I think it's the feedback.
So there has been difficulty with families once they've been on one of these consultations using the video or the camera, that they have utilized most of their internet, the bandwidth and for their month. And I've come across this new term, digital poverty. So have you come across this problem where families are now struggling with actually keeping up with all the consultations? And how do you get around it?
I don't think we've actually come across that yet, fortunately. Jenny might have.
One thing that I've learned, I think, through linking with Gillian in South Africa, is understanding which platforms use more data. I hadn't kind of absorbed some of that. And then when we were talking about how we would do some of these things, and of course, digital poverty is perhaps greater in her context even than ours. And things like Teams, which are very popular in the UK, particularly and the NHS are allowed to use, because not everybody's allowed to use everything, is actually really, really data rich. So that's why we've ended up using Zoom, but making sure we put lots of security in for most of ours, because different platforms use different amount of data.
That's very useful. Thank you, Jenny.
Any other questions or comments? The only thing I would add to that is it's funny, isn't it? Because doing some Zoom sessions with Ghana, and they if you don't have the screen on, then that saves the money as well. But of course, for these sessions, you have to have some sort of visuals, don't you? So yeah, it's a tricky one. Anybody else? Therese.
Hi, I just wanted to say that we also do a lot of hybrid face-to-face stroke virtual, where we might have a therapist in the centre and a therapist out the centre, or therapists in different parts of the world. And that's been quite exciting too. And having local therapists coming into our face-to-face sessions, it's all been quite a big mishmash. And that's been really, the flexibility has been great. And we've certainly seen more of our community colleagues than we ordinarily would have as well.
Yes, there's as Reena sort of highlighted, and they were in the presentation this morning from Israel as well, they were saying, you know, there's lots of advantages as well as disadvantages to telehealth, and we've all been chucked in the deep end, but people are being so creative, and we're all learning to swim very quickly. But it does, you know, it just provides those opportunities, doesn't it, for forums like that, for more people to be involved. Anybody else? Any comment?
I was just going to ask Reena, so going forward then, Reena, as you know, we see this as a huge opportunity and the world's now our oyster to take the best from both worlds in what will hopefully at some point be a post-COVID environment. What do you think therapy should look like going forwards?
Well, I think we should consider, you know, there are some of the visuals that I shared. There are so many things available on the platforms, and one thing is we need to familiarize ourselves with all the things that are possible with the platforms that we use, and to experiment with different platforms as long as the security can be maintained. But I think there are many unused features, and we're discovering as we go along. And that visualizer that I showed is one example. I think we can do so much more in terms of remote assessments for a lot of the things we do, especially as speech and language therapists and OTs. I think we, you know, it lends itself to the things that some of the things we want to do. And yeah, I think there's a lot more that we need to discover and maybe share with each other as we discover them. But I think a combination of face-to-face and video consultations might be a good model to have because of the advantages that we've already mentioned. And I think the travel to the venue, especially if parents have to travel long distances, and also for us to be more relevant in terms of a family's home environment, because for our own service, we don't have the privilege of going to their families' homes, which others might have. So, you know, we can be very irrelevant in terms of what we suggest to a parent, and they're not always outspoken to tell us what is possible for them because they want to comply with what we suggest. But now that we are in their homes, I think we are developing our own skills better in that we don't need a plinth that goes up and down automatically with the press of a button. We have to adjust, we have to adapt our way of thinking to know how to use just what's in everybody's homes. And so therefore, I think when we demonstrate things online, also to use, instead of a wedge, use, which parents don't often have, use something that is similar, that is, you know, so I think we are becoming more creative, and we're discovering skills that we didn't know we had because we are forced. So personally, I know there are lots of disadvantages and difficulties, but personally, I think this is a huge opportunity to provide a service that is so much more better and comprehensive, and but there's a lot still to learn.
Yes, Vardit.
Vardit.
Do you want to unmute yourself?
Thank you. I did. Reena, first of all, I want to thank you. I so much enjoyed the presentation. I was glued to the screen.
Oh.
If I could, I would come all the way there.
Yeah.
I agree with you so much about how, yes, this is a learning experience. I think that it is very important to share. I mean, we're beyond the stage, I feel, of the basic knowledge about telehealth and everything. And yes, sharing the pictures that you used, learning how to use Zoom. I use Zoom to use all the possibilities. And I'm sure that just like my iPhone, I don't know all the possibilities yet. And I'm learning. Something that I found helpful, yes, it does take more time, but I work with the children, and then I find a separate time just to talk with both parents on Zoom. I have found that then they come back to me, and my first question is, what questions do you have for me now that it's quiet, that you're focused, that you're with me? And the feedback on that was, they want that. They want to meet with me afterwards separately and just discuss and ask questions that they can't do when they're with hands on their child. So, but thank you again, Reena. I'm so happy that I signed up
Thank
for
you.
this one.
That's lovely feedback. Thank you.
Keep healthy, everyone.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think what everybody's finding is that actually these sessions take an awful lot more time than the face-to-face sessions do. So you do have to find that time, even though you're not traveling, you do have to find that time within the day to spend, because it's very important time. Reena, have you got that? I'm just thinking about one of the tools that is useful on screen. You know, the eye gaze,
the
visuals. Yes, that might be
Yeah.
useful to
Let
share.
me see. So let me just say, this was in one of our sessions. An occupational therapist and I were working together, and I was working with the AAC, and she wanted to assess the child's visual movements and their ability to eye point. And so she came up with this PowerPoint, just quickly did that and created this thing that's very useful. So hopefully it will work. So this is just moving blobs. And of course, because the child is sitting in front of the screen, we could see where her eyes went. And you can do it as fast and or as slow as you want to, because I'm just clicking buttons. And this could be various size objects. And then you can do that with that. So these are all the features in PowerPoint that you can, it's also something to learn what PowerPoint offers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's great.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to? That's it. Has anybody else got any comments? I think we've got, let me just see. We've got a few more minutes if anybody would like to ask any more questions. I think there's so much information out there we can learn from, and this is why this whole global day is being so valuable, I think, for everybody's learning and sharing.
And should continue, preferably.
Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. Hopefully it's the start of more things to come, really. It's never a Zoom meeting unless you've got a cat or a child that
Yeah.
yeah, we're hoping that if people are really keen and we get good feedback from all these sessions across the world, that we'll do more on different events and perhaps make it an annual thing linked to World CP Day, which it's linked to today. So
Yes,
your feedback.
will do.
Could I make a comment, please, and a request? So I've attended a couple of the sessions. Just prior to this, I was in the Indian session. The number of ideas and innovations coming through are amazing.
Mm.
Strikes me that if we can capture some of these ideas, and also, like you said, that we don't know what the potential of the technology is. And certainly I'd be very helped by Elliot's guide to how to make the most of the technology that we have. Maybe following this, we need a group to come together to try and pull that and produce something which helps us going forward. We have a resources subgroup who are capturing some of the resources that are being produced, and the PowerPoint that you showed, simple but so effective. I was tracking all that stuff going around, and it's mesmerizing actually. So it would be really helpful to see how we can maximize the potential of these things.
Yes, I think that's the key word, isn't it? So everything has so much potential here. Okay.
I was just going to ask, sorry, Dawn.
Yeah.
Have you found you've had a bit more flexibility about kind of the length of the sessions? So if an hour is too much, you can obviously cut it down to half an hour and then book another one in sooner than you might have done. Or I was just wondering whether you were doing more regular sessions than perhaps you would have done prior to everything going virtual.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, the time is definitely flexible. Sometimes it's induced by Zoom, because if you use the free version of Zoom, you only have 40 minutes and then you get bumped off. So that's sometimes a good midpoint to give everyone a break and to, energize. So it gives parents a 5-10 minute break, and then we might come back on for another 40 minutes, and then that would be it. And sometimes we usually, for example, if we traditionally would have a 5-session block, this may not happen in that way, but we have 1 or we have 3 or 4 sessions. It depends on the need. It depends on what is required. So the sessions may be longer, they may be shorter, and sometimes they are cut short by what happens. For example, we had a feeding session with the child with lots of sensory issues. And as the mother presented the food to the child, he immediately vomited. And at that moment, the dad, who had the camera in his hand, he threw the phone on the floor. All we could see was the ceiling, and we could hear the performance in the background as they tried to resolve this issue. And we waited, and we were sort of sitting there looking at each other, my colleague and I, was like, what shall we do? Shall we go? But we sat and we waited about 10-15 minutes before they came back. And so, things like that happen, or the child is just not a good day. And if they traveled a long distance to our therapy center, we know what happens if a child is just not a good day. What a waste that is for them if we can't do anything. Whereas this is in their own environment. They'd say, look, it's not working today. He didn't sleep last night. Can we just call this a day and do it tomorrow? And it's so much easier to fit in. We don't have to travel anywhere, and it's much easier to fit in. So those are the advantages.
Yeah.
Good question.
Best laid plans, hey? Okay. I think then if nobody else has anything to say or ask, then we might call it a day there. And just to say thank you very, very much for everybody for joining us. And have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you, Reena. Thank you, Dawn. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Reena. Bye.
Bye.